Looks like you're winning, kid.
The small town of Red Hollow had its rhythms and rules. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and news traveled faster than the wind across the valley. But lately, the town was buzzing about one man, Caleb Morgan, the widowed cowboy who had been left to raise his children alone after tragedy had struck. Caleb had not always been alone. 2 years ago, he and his wife Eliza had shared a life that many envied. Their mornings began with sunlight spilling into the wooden farmhouse, the smell of fresh bread and laughter echoing through the halls. Their children, Tommy, 8, and Lucy, 5, were full of energy and mischief. Life seemed perfect. Then came the winter that changed everything. A sudden fever swept through the valley, and within days, Eliza was gone. Caleb remembered the cold, harsh mornings after she died, the silence of the house, the children staring at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes, their innocence shattered. The ranch suddenly felt enormous and empty. The work never ended, the chores never ceased, and yet the presence that once made everything feel lighter was gone. For months, Caleb threw himself into labor. The ranch must survive, the cattle must be fed, fences must be repaired. He rose before dawn and returned home well past sunset, exhausted but determined. Yet the hardest part was watching Tommy and Lucy try to navigate a life without their mother. Tommy had become unusually quiet, staring at the horizon as if searching for something he could not name. Lucy, still too young to understand fully, would ask each night, "When will Mama come back?" Her small voice haunted him, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Red Hollow's townsfolk noticed Caleb's struggle and whispered among themselves. Some felt pity, others offered advice, sometimes kindly, sometimes intrusive. "Caleb needs a wife again," they said. "The children need a mother." Even the preacher, a man of patience and gentle wisdom, suggested that perhaps he should consider someone who could bring warmth back into his home. At first, Caleb ignored the advice. The women who came to meet him seemed more interested in the size of his ranch than in the happiness of his children. One admired the cattle, another the prosperity of the land. Their smiles were polite but hollow, and when they spoke to Tommy and Lucy, it was as if the children were an afterthought. Caleb's heart hardened with disappointment. One day, while fixing a fence along the ridge, Caleb watched the children play in the dusty yard. Their laughter, so rare and fleeting, reminded him of how fragile life was. He realized that no one could take Eliza's place, and perhaps he didn't want anyone to try. Still, a quiet longing tugged at his heart, a desire for someone who could love his children as fiercely as he did, someone who could make their small family feel whole again. It was during this time that Margaret Hale entered his life. Margaret, a curvy and soft-spoken woman, had spent most of her life in the quiet routines of Red Hollow. She was a schoolteacher, a helper, and someone who had always been judged by the narrow standards of the town. People whispered about her appearance, doubted her worth, and assumed she would never marry. Margaret had grown accustomed to the whispers, keeping her head low and focusing on the few things she loved, teaching children, tending a small garden, and offering kindness wherever it was needed. One afternoon, on a breeze-filled day, Margaret rode slowly toward Caleb's ranch. Her hands were clasped nervously, and her eyes avoided the gaze of passers-by. She didn't wear fine clothing or jewels. She didn't try to impress. She simply rode toward a family she wished she could help, driven by the pull of compassion she couldn't ignore. Caleb noticed her approach from the porch. Something about her calm, measured steps made him pause. He had met many women in the past weeks, but none of them had carried the quiet strength he saw in Margaret. He gestured to the porch. "Afternoon," he called. "Can I help you?" Her voice was tentative, but carried a warmth that immediately caught Caleb's attention. Lucy peeked from behind the kitchen door, curious. Margaret noticed the small girl and knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "Hello there," she said kindly. Lucy didn't respond, but she didn't hide either. Caleb's heart softened at the sight. They sat at the kitchen table, and Margaret spoke with honesty. She told Caleb about her life in the town, her quiet work with children, and the way the years of whispered criticisms had made her doubt her worth. She paused, then said something that made the room still. "I'm not fit for any man," she admitted. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly, unsure how to respond. Then she added softly, "But I can love your children." The words lingered in the room like a soft wind. Caleb didn't reply immediately. Instead, he watched Margaret as she reached out to Lucy, gently helping her fix a small wooden doll with a ribbon she tied like a bandage. Tommy, shy and cautious, stepped closer, drawn to her kindness. Margaret began telling a story about a mischievous chicken she had known in her childhood. And soon the children were laughing freely, a sound Caleb had almost forgotten. Over the next days, Margaret continued to help. She cooked meals, cleaned, and offered her attention to Tommy and Lucy without hesitation. She listened to their fears, shared in their joys, and most importantly, treated them as if they were her own. Caleb noticed the change immediately. His children began sleeping better, laughing louder, and asking questions about the day with genuine curiosity instead of sorrow. One evening, while watching the children play, Caleb realized something profound. Margaret's worth was not measured by her appearance or the town's judgment. It was measured by her heart, the quiet strength she offered without expectation, the love she gave freely, and the patience she showed in guiding his children through grief. Margaret had come to the ranch unsure of herself, believing she could not fill a man's heart. Yet she had already done something more important. She had filled the hearts of two small children, bringing warmth, joy, and hope back into a house that had known only silence. Caleb finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "You said you're not fit for any man," he said. Margaret looked down, waiting. "But my children, they've already chosen you." Lucy ran to Margaret, throwing her arms around her waist. Tommy smiled shyly, standing beside her. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, tears not of sorrow, but of relief, recognition, and the quiet joy of finding a place where she belonged. That night, as Caleb watched the two of them from the porch, he realized something he hadn't expected. Perhaps love wasn't about finding the perfect woman for himself. Perhaps it was about finding the perfect woman for his children, someone whose heart could heal the cracks that grief had left behind. In that moment, under the twilight sky of Red Hollow, Caleb felt a quiet peace for the first time in years. The ranch no longer felt empty, the house no longer echoed with loneliness, and the children had found a mother in the woman who had thought herself unworthy. Life would not be easy, of course. Challenges lay ahead, crops could fail, cattle could stray, and whispers from the town would continue. But for the first time, Caleb knew they would face in together. A man, his children, and a woman whose heart had proven far greater than anyone in Red Hollow had ever imagined. The days following Margaret's first visit to the Morgan household marked a quiet transformation. Caleb had allowed her presence not as a potential partner, but as someone who could nurture the children, though even he could feel the warmth spreading quietly through the walls of his home. Margaret's gentle influence extended beyond Tommy and Lucy. She began noticing the ranch's struggles, subtle but critical. The soil was dry, the irrigation channels clogged from winter's snowmelt, and the crops that had survived were stunted. Caleb, burdened with daily labor, had not yet found time to address these details. He had assumed the ranch was manageable with brute force alone, but Margaret saw the weaknesses that threatened its future. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the ridges, Margaret approached Caleb in the barn. She carried with her a few simple sketches, illustrations she had drawn from observing the ranch and recalling her own childhood experiences with her father's farm. "Caleb," she began softly, "I've been thinking, maybe we can try something different. I know you've worked so hard, but sometimes a little planning can save more than just effort." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Planning?" he asked skeptically. I've managed this ranch alone for 2 years. What could you possibly add? Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she pointed to the sketches. See this? There's a stream running just beyond the north fence. It's small, but if we dig a channel and create a simple irrigation system, we could water the fields that have barely survived the drought. And we could plant these crops here, hardy plants that need less water but yield enough to sustain the ranch until the rains come. Caleb studied the diagrams. There was merit in them, undeniable logic. Yet he hesitated. He had seen many plans fail, and many helpers leave when the work became real. Margaret, however, was different. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm, and her voice carried conviction without arrogance. He agreed, reluctantly, to try her idea. Margaret worked alongside Caleb, kneeling in the dirt to map the channels, instructing Tommy and Lucy on simple tasks like carrying buckets and planting seeds. The children responded immediately to her guidance, their laughter filling the dusty air. For Caleb, watching Margaret manage both the work and the children was humbling. She possessed a patience he hadn't realized he had missed all this time. Neighbors began to notice. Some whispered skeptically, others curiously. Margaret, once dismissed as unfit and judged harshly for her appearance, was now leading the ranch toward salvation. She directed the workers, adjusted irrigation channels, and even innovated a simple rain harvesting system that could fill the water troughs for the cattle. Each day, she solved problems with intelligence and calm, earning Caleb's quiet respect and the slow admiration of the children. Weeks turned into months. The fields that had seemed doomed now sprouted green shoots. The crops flourished, despite the lingering drought, and the ranch slowly regained its former strength. The once silent Morgan home was now filled with chatter, laughter, and the sound of work being done together. Caleb had started to realize something remarkable. Margaret's influence was not just practical. It had restored hope. One afternoon, while inspecting the north field, Caleb noticed Margaret kneeling beside Tommy and Lucy, showing them how to properly plant seedlings. The children were engaged and focused, their faces radiant with pride at their contribution. Caleb felt a pang of admiration for her, seeing how effortlessly she inspired trust and confidence in his children. "She's incredible," he muttered under his breath, mostly to himself. "What's that?" Margaret asked without looking up, her hands still guiding Lucy's little fingers. Caleb smiled faintly. "Nothing," he said, "just, you're incredible." Margaret blushed slightly, looking away, focusing instead on the plants. She wasn't seeking praise, but Caleb noticed how much she deserved it. She had arrived unsure of herself, convinced she was unfit for love or admiration. And yet, she had transformed the ranch and the children's lives with nothing but intelligence, care, and quiet determination. The same voices that once whispered cruel judgments about her curves and her quiet nature now remarked on her skill, her leadership, and the way she had saved the ranch from ruin. It was an ironic twist. The woman they had dismissed as unworthy was the very reason the Morgan Ranch stood strong. Caleb's admiration grew each day, but beyond the practical success, it was Margaret's emotional impact that resonated most deeply. She had brought back laughter to the children's lives, a sense of safety and normalcy that had been absent for years. Caleb realized that while he had provided for them physically, Margaret had nurtured their hearts. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Caleb and Margaret sat quietly on the porch, watching Tommy and Lucy run through the fields. The ranch, once desolate and struggling, now seemed alive with promise. "You've done more than I could have imagined," Caleb said softly. "Not just with the ranch, but with my children." Margaret looked down, fidgeting with her hands. "I didn't do it for praise," she whispered. I wanted to help. I wanted to make a difference, even if I can't, be enough for a man." Caleb leaned back, taking a deep breath. "Maybe you don't have to be enough for a man," he said carefully. "You've been everything my children needed. That's more than enough." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of doubt. They were tears of relief, hope, and belonging. She had thought herself unworthy, yet she had proven her worth through courage, intelligence, and love. The ranch continued to thrive. Crops grew, cattle prospered, and the children flourished under Margaret's guidance. Caleb realized that the bond forming between them was more profound than he had expected. Margaret had entered his life quietly, thinking she could offer only kindness, but in reality, she had become the anchor that held the family together. The success of the ranch was celebrated quietly among the Morgan household first, then noticed by neighbors and townsfolk. The whispers in Red Hollow began to change, from judgment to admiration. Margaret's transformation from the woman the town had scorned to the heroine who saved a struggling ranch was undeniable. By the end of the season, Caleb looked over the fields, the children playing in the distance, and Margaret tending to the last of the crops. A smile touched his lips. For the first time since Eliza's passing, he felt a sense of peace, hope, and even love. Margaret had proven not only her intelligence and courage, but also her heart, and Caleb knew that the life they were building together was just beginning. The Morgan Ranch had begun to thrive under Margaret's quiet guidance, but her most profound impact was not in the crops, the irrigation channels, or the fences. It was in the hearts of Tommy and Lucy, the two children who had spent months wandering through grief and silence. From the very first day, Margaret had treated them not as obstacles, but as individuals with their own thoughts, fears, and feelings. She remembered their small details, the way Lucy clutched her doll at night, the little habit Tommy had of tapping his fingers when he was nervous, the songs they hummed while helping in the kitchen. Margaret didn't just notice these things, she respected them. She nurtured them. She gave them space to be children, while quietly guiding them toward healing. One afternoon, after a long day of working in the fields, Margaret suggested a small break. The children sat beside her on the porch steps, legs dangling over the edge, and she pulled from her bag a simple deck of cards. "Ever play Go Fish?" she asked softly. Tommy and Lucy's eyes lit up with curiosity. They had never spent a quiet afternoon in play before, their days filled with chores or silent brooding over their mother's absence. Margaret shuffled the cards and dealt them carefully, her hands steady and patient. As they played, something remarkable happened. Tommy laughed openly, a sound that Caleb had thought lost forever. Lucy's small voice chimed in with giggles as she tried to cheat playfully, her doll resting beside her on the steps. Margaret laughed too, not at them, but with them, her warmth spilling into the evening air. Caleb watched silently from the porch, leaning against the wooden post. He had seen many women enter their lives in the past weeks, visitors who admired the ranch, judged the children, or stayed polite at the edges, but none had connected this way. Margaret didn't merely tolerate his children. She embraced them. She made them feel seen, valued, and loved. Days passed, and the bond deepened. Margaret involved Tommy and Lucy in every part of ranch life, from planting crops to feeding cattle. She never forced them to do more than they could handle. She celebrated their achievements, laughed at their mistakes, and always made time for quiet, playful moments. One evening, the children sat by the fireplace, Lucy resting her head on Margaret's lap, Tommy beside her. Margaret told them a story about a little girl who tamed a wild horse with patience and kindness. The children listened, rapt, and when the story ended, Lucy whispered softly, "I wish you could stay forever." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Yeah," he said quietly, You're the only one who makes things feel normal." Margaret's heart swelled, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she belonged here. She had come thinking she could only offer help, guidance, and care. Yet the children's words, simple and honest, told her she was already part of their family. Caleb noticed the shift too. He saw the children seeking Margaret's approval, leaning on her comfort, laughing with her joyfully. He realized that she had become the mother figure his children had longed for, not through obligation, but by earning their trust and love. It was during one quiet night, as the three of them sat under the stars in the field, that Caleb fully understood the magnitude of what was happening. The children had chosen her, not because she was perfect, or because the town deemed her worthy, but because she had given them something no one else could: a sense of family, safety, and unconditional love. Margaret knelt beside them, her arms around the children. "Do you both like being here?" she asked softly. "Yes," Lucy exclaimed. "We like everything." Tommy's response was quieter, more heartfelt. You make everything better. You make the ranch, the house, everything feel like home." Margaret looked up at Caleb, tears in her eyes. She had never believed she could have this kind of impact on anyone, let alone a family so cautious and scarred by grief. The children's choice validated her heart in a way no one else's judgment ever could. Caleb finally spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "You've earned more than my respect," he said. "You've earned my children's hearts, and in doing that, you've become a part of this family." For Margaret, the moment was transformative. She had thought herself unworthy of love, unfit for a man, and unable to claim a place in the lives of others. But through patience, kindness, and unwavering care, the children had chosen her. Their love was honest, unfiltered, and entirely hers. The town of Red Hollow, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes as well. The children were happier, more engaged, and thriving. Caleb was calmer, more confident, and the ranch was flourishing. Whispers of admiration began to replace the old murmurs of judgment. Some neighbors approached Margaret quietly, asking for advice on their own land, impressed by her wisdom and the affection the children showed her. Yet Margaret remained humble, focused entirely on the Morgan household. She had discovered something more important than recognition: belonging. The children's choice had given her a sense of purpose and self-worth she had never experienced. Even Caleb began to see it clearly. He watched Margaret sit with Tommy, helping him read a new book, or kneel beside Lucy, teaching her to sew a small ribbon for her doll, and he felt a mixture of admiration, respect, and something deeper stirring in his chest. She was the heart of the family, the anchor the children had quietly chosen, and the woman he had never realized he could rely on. One rainy afternoon, while fixing a broken fence, Caleb noticed Lucy running into the barn, her small arms wrapped around Margaret's waist. Tommy followed, shy but insistent, tugging at her sleeve. Caleb smiled quietly, understanding exactly what this meant. The children had chosen Margaret not out of politeness or need, but out of love, the truest, most profound choice a child could make. That evening, as the rain fell softly outside, and the family gathered around the hearth, Caleb spoke again, this time addressing both Margaret and the children. "You two," he said, nodding at Tommy and Lucy, "have made it very clear who belongs in this house." He looked at Margaret, his voice softening. "And you belong here too." Margaret's tears fell freely this time, not of doubt, but of joy. The children hugged her tightly, their small arms wrapped around her as if to seal their choice forever. Caleb stood behind them, quietly overwhelmed, realizing that Margaret's presence had healed wounds he had thought permanent. In that moment, the Morgan household was whole again, not because of plans or land, not because of work completed or crops grown, but because of love freely given and freely accepted. The children had made their choice, and in doing so, they had shown Margaret that she was more than enough. The stars shone brightly through the rain-streaked sky, and for the first time in years, the Morgan family felt truly at peace. Margaret had proven herself not through society's measure, but through the heart of two small children who had recognized her worth before anyone else. And Caleb knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, a family forged by love, respect, and the quiet, unwavering bond that only true care could create. Margaret Hale had arrived at the Morgan Ranch, carrying more than baskets, books, and quiet courage. She carried a past that had shaped her heart in ways she rarely shared. To the town, she was simply the curvy schoolteacher, kind yet unassuming, a woman often judged by whispers about her appearance. To Caleb and the children, she had become a source of love, laughter, and hope. But beneath her calm exterior lay scars that had once convinced her she was unworthy of love or belonging. Years earlier, Margaret had known a different kind of life. She had fallen in love with a kind man named Jonathan, a traveler who shared her love of books, stories, and small acts of kindness. For a time, she believed she had found a life full of promise. But tragedy struck when Jonathan and their infant child were lost in a carriage accident. The pain had been unbearable. Margaret spent months in solitude, grieving silently, never sharing the depth of her loss with anyone. She feared that opening her heart again would only invite more heartbreak. This hidden sorrow had shaped every choice she had made since. She had avoided romantic connections, believing herself unfit for any man. She had embraced her work with children and small acts of kindness as a safe outlet, a way to contribute to the world without risking herself. To the town, she was quiet, reserved, even aloof, but it was protection. Now, at the Morgan Ranch, that past quietly lingered in the shadows. Though she smiled for Tommy and Lucy, her nights were often restless. Lying in the small guest room that Caleb had offered her, she stared at the ceiling, thinking of Jonathan and the child she had lost. Could she truly open her heart again? Could she allow herself to belong, to be loved, without fear? One evening, after the children were asleep and Caleb had gone to check the cattle, Margaret wandered into the kitchen, lost in thought. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. She poured herself a cup of tea, staring out the window at the stars shimmering over the valley. She felt both drawn to Caleb and terrified, drawn to the warmth he represented, but terrified that loving again could mean risking everything she had survived. The next morning, Caleb noticed her quiet demeanor. "You've been quiet," he said gently. "Something on your mind?" Margaret hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Just memories." Caleb's expression softened. "You don't have to hide them from me," he said. "I've lost too. I understand grief. I understand fear. But hiding it doesn't make it go away. Sometimes facing it, sometimes sharing it, helps more than you realize." Margaret looked at him, her heart pounding. There was honesty in his eyes, a depth of understanding she had never experienced. Could she trust him with the truth? Could she risk revealing the grief she had carried alone for so long? That evening, after the children had gone to bed, she finally spoke. I lost someone once," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "A man I loved, and our child. They were gone in an instant, and I've never allowed myself to hope again." Caleb reached out, placing his hand over hers. "Margaret, I don't care about the past. What matters is now. What matters is the life we're building together, with Tommy and Lucy. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here. That's enough." Tears filled Margaret's eyes, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to fall safe enough to release the pain she had carried silently. She told Caleb about Jonathan, about the child, about the fear that had kept her from love. And Caleb listened, not with judgment, but with compassion, with the quiet understanding that had first drawn her to him. The days that followed were transformative. Margaret began to allow herself small joys she had denied for years. She laughed more freely, shared stories of her childhood, and let the children see her warmth, not just as a teacher or caretaker, but as a woman with dreams, hopes, and a heart capable of love. Tommy and Lucy, perceptive as children often are, noticed the change. They saw Margaret smiling genuinely, heard her singing quietly in the kitchen, and felt her care not as duty, but as love. The bond deepened, not just because of her actions, but because of the authenticity she allowed them to witness. Caleb noticed too. Each day, he saw Margaret's courage, Not the kind that moved mountains or saved crops, but the kind that allowed a heart to heal, to open, and to love again despite past pain. He realized that her hidden past, far from being a burden, had shaped the depth of her character, her empathy, and her strength. One rainy afternoon, as Margaret and the children worked to repair a fence, Caleb watched quietly from the porch. He remembered the first time Margaret had arrived, timid, uncertain, unsure of her place in the world. Now she moved with confidence, guiding the children, laughing at their antics, and solving problems with patience and intelligence. The woman who had once feared love and life was now the heart of his family. The town's whispers had begun to shift, but Margaret remained focused on what mattered most, the Morgan household. Yet, even she could not ignore the quiet satisfaction she felt in proving, first to herself and now to the world, that her past did not define her future. She was capable of love, courage, and change. She was, in every sense, enough. By the end of the season, the ranch was thriving, the children were happy, and Margaret had earned the quiet respect and affection of Caleb. More importantly, she had reclaimed her own heart. No longer a woman defined by loss, fear, or judgment, she had discovered that she could give and receive love freely, without reservation. The stars shone over Red Hollow that night, bright and infinite. Margaret sat on the porch, with Caleb beside her, holding Tommy and Lucy between them. She felt a quiet peace, a sense of belonging, and a profound gratitude. Her past had been painful, yes, but it had also made her capable of the love she now gave so fully. And Caleb, watching her with admiration and quiet reverence, understood that the woman who had healed his children, saved his ranch, and opened his heart was truly extraordinary. In the heart of Red Hollow, under the canopy of stars and the soft glow of lantern light, Margaret Hale finally allowed herself to believe in hope, in love, and in the family she had chosen, and that had chosen her.
I have a pear!
Looks like you're winning, kid.
There's a good party.
Red Hollow had always been a town of whispers. Its dusty streets and wooden porches carried rumors faster than the wind. And for years, those whispers had followed Margaret Hale wherever she went, about her curves, her quiet nature, her supposed unworthiness. But the transformation at the Morgan Ranch could no longer be hidden, and slowly the town began to notice. It started with small comments. Neighbors observed the laughter of Tommy and Lucy, children once somber and withdrawn, now vibrant and playful. The crops at the Morgan Ranch flourished, green and strong despite previous droughts. Even the cattle were healthier, more content under Margaret's attentive care. Folks who had once dismissed Margaret began to whisper, not with judgment, but with curiosity. One bright morning, the town council gathered in the main hall to discuss an upcoming harvest festival. As usual, members of the community exchanged small talk and gossip, and inevitably, the topic of the Morgan family came up. "Have you noticed the Morgan children?" a farmer remarked. "They're different, happier than ever. That woman of theirs, Margaret I think her name is, has done something right." An older woman, who had once criticized Margaret openly, nodded slowly. "I never thought I'd see it. She actually cares for those children, and she knows how to run that ranch better than anyone I've seen." Whispers turned to admiration. It wasn't immediate, but Red Hollow had begun to shift its opinion. The woman they had scorned for years was now the person everyone turned to for advice, respect, and most importantly, recognition of her integrity. Meanwhile, at the Morgan Ranch, life continued quietly but profoundly. Caleb watched Margaret interact with the children, correcting Tommy's spelling and teaching Lucy how to plant seeds. She moved naturally, confidently, the embodiment of patience and wisdom. Caleb had often wondered if the town's judgment would ever fade, but he had learned that approval was not required for love or family to flourish. Margaret had proven her worth, not through words or appearances, but through action, heart, and the unwavering care she gave to his children and home. One afternoon, a group of townsfolk approached the ranch. Some came with cautious smiles, others with curiosity. Margaret greeted them politely, but it was Caleb who spoke first. "I know some of you have your doubts," he began, his voice steady, "but Margaret has done more than you might ever understand. She saved this ranch, cared for my children, and brought hope where there was despair. She is part of this family." The crowd paused, unsure of what to say. Margaret stepped forward, her hands clasped calmly. "I never asked for recognition," she said softly. "I came here to help, to care for these children, and to do my part. But what matters most is that they feel safe, loved, and happy. That is all the acknowledgement I need." A hush fell over the crowd. It was rare in Red Hollow for someone to speak with such quiet authority, yet it carried undeniable weight. The people exchanged glances, realizing that their long-held judgments were baseless. This woman, whom they had underestimated, had proven herself through love, courage, and action. Tommy and Lucy ran forward, tugging Margaret's hands. "See," Caleb said quietly to the crowd, "even my children know who she is. That's enough." The townsfolk nodded, some wiping tears, others smiling, finally understanding. The whispers that had once followed Margaret were replaced by respect. The gossip that had weighed her down was replaced by acknowledgement of her worth. Red Hollow had learned a lesson about judging too quickly, about underestimating strength and character, and about recognizing love in its truest form. Over time, the festival approached. Margaret, Caleb, and the children walked together into town, hand in hand. People smiled, greeted them warmly, and offered congratulations for the successful harvest and the thriving ranch. Margaret's heart swelled, not with pride, but with the quiet fulfillment of finally belonging, of being accepted not just by a man and his children, but by the community she had once feared. That evening, the festival lights shimmered over Red Hollow. Children danced, music floated through the air, and laughter echoed across the town square. Caleb held Margaret's hand tightly, watching Tommy and Lucy run freely, carefree for the first time in years. "You've changed everything," Caleb whispered. "Not just the ranch, not just the children, but all of us. You've changed the town, too." Margaret smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of lanterns. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "The children chose love. You allowed me into their lives, and together we built something lasting." As the night deepened, the people of Red Hollow gathered around, sharing stories, food, and laughter. Margaret had become more than a caretaker. She was a symbol of resilience, compassion, and quiet courage. The town's judgment had been replaced by respect and admiration, and in that moment she finally understood the power of love and acceptance. Caleb, watching Margaret laugh with the children, realized that his life had been irrevocably changed by her presence. The ranch had survived, the children had healed, and a family had been reborn. Margaret had not only saved the Morgan family, but had reminded the entire town that true worth is measured by heart, courage, and integrity, not appearances, gossip, or idle judgment. The night ended with stars twinkling above Red Hollow, and the Morgan family standing together, united, strong, and loved. Margaret had finally found her place, Caleb had found his partner, and the children had found the mother they had always needed. The town had learned to see her for who she truly was, and Red Hollow would never forget the woman who had brought hope, love, and life back into a family and a community.